Monty Python took an hour and 35 minutes to tell the life of Brian. And it seems like no amount of time at all would be enough to talk about the life of our Brian. But here goes. My dad's vocation was teaching, and through his work as a secondary school history and modern studies teacher in Glasgow, Rothesay, and then as lecturer here at Dumfries and Galloway College, he has helped thousands of people gain the skills and qualifications to progress in life. Now, he wouldn't approve of any pride or boastfulness, but that's really a legacy worth celebrating. Through his skill as a teacher, he brought learning to life, and he helped his students, including his 3 sons, to connect learning with the real world. Our Gareth, Brian's middle son, was just sharing a wonderful memory of being incredibly nervous the night before his higher English exam, and Brian helping him out by bringing the famous poem by Keats, Ode to Autumn. He brought it to life for him and settled his nerves. Although Brian had other jobs, many other jobs, and enjoyed a long retirement of many years, I don't think he ever lost his passion for teaching and education. In fact, he was such a teacher that he would quite often slip into what we, the family, call lecture mode home, where he would get himself onto a topic and start pacing up and down the kitchen. From a young age, we boys learned to spot the early warning signs of an incoming lecture and quietly slipped out the room one by one before he could hit full flow. What we would give for just one more lecture. In addition to teaching, he also did some volunteer youth work in Glasgow, and later on, in the late 1980s, when he saw his eldest son Barry and his friends trying to start their own football team, he stepped in and created Parkgate FC, a club open to all ages and competing with the established teams of the area. As skint underdogs, the scores on the pitch were rarely something to celebrate, but there are countless kids in the areas of Nethermill, Parkgate, Amosfield, Torthorald, Lochmaben, who fondly remember their time playing for Parkgate FC, many of whom have reached out with their condolences these past couple of weeks. My dad would have really enjoyed this gathering of people, and for those of you who knew him well, you know, as well as I do, that if he were able to, he'd be over to talk to you with his customary warmth, humour. He'd probably have a moan about the weather, and if you asked him about any of the arrangements for today, he'd complain that nobody tells me nothing. But also he'd be over to you with that marvellous thing that he did. He made you see just how important you were to him. And family was so important to Brian. Son to Hugh and Anne, wee brother to Hugh and Owen, big brother to Dennis and Marie, brother-in-law to Margaret and Raymond and Anne and Bruce and Ian, and uncle to several nieces and nephews, and he'd be so proud and genuinely touched that you are here today. With his wife of 52 years, Laura, our mum, he built a close family with 3 sons, Barry, Gareth, and myself, Jamie. And the family life was full of love, fun, humour, and of course, plenty of rows, huffs, tantrums, and arguments. Usually, all of those experienced just trying to get to Mass on time. In 1979, my dad took up a post at the college here in Dumfries, and the family moved to Nethermill. And I think many of us here today will remember the schoolhouse at Nethermill with fondness, with its big wide open spaces and some truly epic parties that went on into the night. Brian loved the garden at Nethermill and subsequently the garden at his home in Dumfries, where he grew lots of plants, peas, strawberries and potatoes. That garden at Nethermill also gave us boys plenty of space to play football and endless possibilities for mischief and carry on. I've been warned against telling any stories of mischief, but see me after for details. I think Brian was always on his best form at parties and family get-togethers, especially when we got around the dinner table. And when us boys were younger, we always ate our evening meal together as a family. And as time went on, that dinner table grew to include his daughters-in-law, Nicola, who first met Brian when she was just 15, and later on Avril, and of course his 4 grandchildren, Sam, Emily, Paul and Joseph, of whom he was immensely proud. Birthdays, anniversaries, Easters, Christmases, I can't count how many delicious feasts we've enjoyed together at that dinner table. I can, however, count on one hand the number of times my dad actually cooked anything. To give him his credit, he could make a very good bolognese, so he told us, and he loved a good curry, but he mostly left the cooking to Laura. But he was never shy when it came to bringing out the whiskey and making sure everyone's glass was topped up. Some of the best memories from our childhood was when Brian and Laura used to tow a trailer tent down to Dover and get the ferry on to Calais and drive around France. One year we ventured into the north of Spain, and another year we went over into the Alps, into Italy. Now, I know that sounds quite impressive, and it really was, especially if you saw the car that did that driving. But if you were familiar with my dad's sense of direction and planning, there is a chance we were actually just trying to find whales. Brian loved the heat. He'd quite often joke with us that he had actually been stolen as a baby from the side of a Spanish swimming pool and whisked off to a new life in Partick. He loved a family holiday to the sun. He visited the US, Canada, the Caribbean, Dubai, and he made pilgrimages to Lourdes and the Holy Land with my mum. He loved tapas, cold, crisp white wine with a view of the sunset. His adventures took him to work in Saudi Arabia, Limerick, Germany and Budapest, and we are left with some amazing stories, like the time he went to Stuttgart at the age of 18 to make his fortune, selling encyclopedias to American soldiers. It turned out he wasn't a great salesman, and when he ran out of money, he had to hitchhike back from Stuttgart with no cash at all. Somehow he made it back to Glasgow Cross in less than 48 hours. But wherever he went, Brian took that unmistakable can-do attitude, that Glaswegian spirit, and the sharp humour, and he left his mark in every single place that he went to. Brian and Laura were married for 52 years. To be perfectly honest, I'm not actually sure how they got past the first date. My mum was expecting to be taken out to the pictures, but my dad made a last-minute change of plan, saying, "You might want to change your shoes. We're going to Hampden to see Scotland play Brazil." And my mum must have been really impressed with this, because they ended up married for 52 years. We have some really precious memories just recently of celebrating their golden wedding anniversary 2 years ago, when my mum and dad took the whole family off for a weekend of celebrating. Brian was passionate about many things in life: family, equality, liberty, fairness. But I will personally remember him most for his passion for football. One of us boys' earliest footballing memories was our dad coming back from the World Cup in Spain in 1982 with Barcelona shirts for the 3 of us and telling us stories of the great heroes he'd seen, like Maradona, Dalglish, Platini, igniting a lifelong love for the beautiful game in his sons. His enthusiasm for the game was infectious, I think even eventually converting my mum, although with 4 footballing males in the house, some might call that conditioning. And of course, I have to mention his love for the Glasgow Celtic. He attended his first game in 1953, taken along by his uncle Owen Coulter, and Brian has been a season ticket holder and shareholder for the last 30 years. And through those season tickets, he gave his children and Laura, and now his grandchildren, the gift of being part of the Celtic family. And we have so many great shared experiences of the highs and lows of being a Celtic supporter. Something you might not know about my dad is that he actually took his duty as a shareholder quite seriously and regularly challenged the board to live up to the founding principles of the club. I remember one AGM in particular when he gave Dermot Desmond and the other directors a bit of a verbal roasting when the club refused to pay the national living wage. I think Celtic went hand in hand with his commitment to equality, charity, social justice, and standing against prejudice. Brian was an active Labour Party member until around 2014, and he fought a council election as a Labour candidate. He was a committed trade unionist, and as EIS rep, he worked long and hard to keep up the fair pay and conditions of his fellow workers. I've mentioned family and football, and the last F that I want to mention is faith. Brian was faithful to the church and brought us boys up in the faith. His faith had its foundations in St. Simon's in Partick, where he was an altar boy, St. Peter's Primary School and St. Mungo's Academy. Him and my mum made sure we attended Mass as a family and were disciplined in our adherence to the practices of the church. As a sulky teenager, I didn't always appreciate having to go to Mass every week, but they knew it was worth fighting for. He was an active member in the communities wherever he worshipped, whether it was reading at Mass, taking the Holy Sacrament to the sick, or his membership of the St. Vincent de Paul Society. Brian died on Christmas Eve, and it's so fitting that his final gift to Laura, Nicola, Avril, his children and his grandchildren was a brand new copy of the Sunday Missal. And I see this as part of his lifelong invite to all of us to join him in his faith, because he knew and he hoped that it would bring us all together again. And in each missal, he had written a wee message at the front with the words, "Remember me in your prayers." So, on his behalf, I pass his last request on to the rest of you. Please remember Brian in your prayers.